welcome everyone to our support webinar. We do these support webinars every month and they're always free. I am Juliet Austin from the Mind Body Training Institute. I am a former psychotherapist and current marketing consultant and website copywriter. And Clinton over here, my partner at the Mind Body Training Institute, is a relationship therapist on the East Coast of Australia.
Thank you, Juliet. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion with Candice Platter. We're going to be speaking about working with family members of those struggling with an addiction. And to tell you about the structure of today, Candice will be having a discussion with us for about 30 to 40 minutes. Then we will open the discussion to questions from attendees. And finally, we will be sharing links to all of Candice's resources in the last few minutes. So stay tuned for that. Juliet.
Great. So let me introduce Candice, who I have known, I think for, I don't know, must be 2008, 2006, I'm thinking, Candice, long time.
Something like that. Yep.
Candice is an addictions therapist in private practice in Vancouver, Canada. And for more than 3 decades, she's helped addicts and their loved ones understand their dysfunctional behaviors and make healthier life choices. She's a former addict herself, 34 years clean and sober. Yay! Candice has learned that overcoming addiction is a family condition. Everyone in the family is affected by addiction and everyone needs to heal. She's the developer of the Love with Boundaries family addiction counseling and therapy method, where she works with her team of counselors and coaches, helping families and their addicted loved ones break the devastating cycle of addiction for good. She's also the author of the book, Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself. We will be sending out at the end of this in the chat, stay tuned for that. We'll be sending the links for Candice's resources and her book. So stay tuned. So should we get started with the questions?
Yes,
Sure.
Let's get underway here. So Candice, I think it makes sense to really start at the beginning. How did you come to be working in the addictions field and more specifically with loved ones of those who are addicted?
Yeah. Well, I could probably talk the whole time about that. Hi, everyone. But I'll try to nutshell it for you. In the 1970s, I was all of a sudden very sick. And that had been after, a childhood, a young adulthood of being very healthy. Suddenly, I became very ill, and I thought it was food poisoning because it was those kinds of symptoms, the kind of symptoms nobody wants to ever talk about. I had those symptoms. And the problem was that it never stopped. So clearly it wasn't food poisoning. At that time, the doctors did not know what to do for me. They had no idea what was wrong with me. They told me it was all in my head, which it was not. And so what they did was throw a lot of medication at me. And a lot of those meds were very addictive meds, like Valium and other benzos, opioids like codeine and morphine and OxyContin, and they just kept repeating those prescriptions for me over and over, month after month, year after year. So, in the doctor's defense, they, addiction wasn't really on the radar at that point, certainly not the way it is today. And I don't think they had any idea what they were unleashing upon me by doing this. But what happened was that I became addicted to all of these substances because they're all addictive substances. Anybody's body would become addicted. And I also increased my pot use, which had just been recreational before, but I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease is an inflammatory bowel illness for people who don't know. Today, most people have heard of Crohn's. They usually know somebody who has Crohn's. The problem is that today, a lot of doctors are still prescribing these medications quite freely to people, and they're becoming addicted to them. So all of those substances, the benzos, the opioids, my pot use, all of those are depressants in the human system. So if you fast forward 15 years, I was so depressed that I was basically suicidal. I was starting to think about how many pills I had. If I timed it right, I could take them and not be found, and I could kill myself. And I started getting a little scared about that. I thought I might actually do it. So I made a decision to reach out for help at that point. I called the Vancouver Crisis Center, and whoever I talked to there basically saved my life. And from there, I went into a psych ward for about a month because I was afraid that if I had my clothes, I would go and kill myself. And from that place, I started my recovery from addiction. That's when I found out that this was addiction. I did not know. I had no idea what was going on for me. I just knew I was miserable and unhappy and sick, and I didn't want to live that way anymore. So I went to 12-step programs for a while and got my 10 years, my 10-year cake, and then started to look at their philosophy, which I really was no longer in alignment with, because the 12-step programs basically tell you that you have a disease and you're powerless over that disease, and you'll continue to relapse because that's a normal, natural part of recovery. And I was sitting there at 10 years clean and sober, thinking, wait a minute, I'm not powerless over this. I'm 10 years clean. I make this decision every day. So I started moving away from that and developing a different way of looking at addiction, which maybe we can talk about today. When I was ready to go back to work, because for a while I just was too sick to do that, I decided that I wanted to go into the addiction field. I had been a teacher before that, and I wanted to give back all the help that I had been given, and I really felt an alignment with the whole addiction field. So I started working in Vancouver's downtown east side, which, as Juliet knows, it's the lowest income area of Canada, and it's where many, many of our homeless and addicted people are, and people with mental health problems. And I started working as a counselor, as an addictions counselor there. And I was there for about 16 years and loved the work. And I started to get phone calls from the families of the clients that I was working with, because I was just working with the alcoholics and the addicts in the center that I worked at. And the family members started to call me, and they were saying things like, we're at the end of our rope. We don't know what to do anymore. What do we do? And I kind of said, I don't know. I had no idea really what to tell them. But I had them come in and started to talk with them. And I saw some patterns and some things that they were doing with the addicts that they loved so much, some things that weren't helpful at all and were just kind of keeping the addiction going. And I started working with them. And as I worked with them, the addicts and alcoholics started to change what they were doing as well. And so I thought, I'm onto something here. And that's how it progressed.
Yeah. That's great. I remember
that was a long explanation, wasn't
it? But it's interesting that whole story. The next question has to do with your book, Loving an Addict, Loving Yourself. And I remember when you were really started to focus on families in your private practice a lot. So maybe you could just say a little bit about the subtitle of that book is The Top 10 Survival Tips for Someone
loving someone with an
addiction. Yeah. We'll be sending the link out after and in the chat after. But so do you want to talk about what gave you the idea for that book, or what are the 10, like where'd you get the 10 tips from, or what do they mean? We don't have to go through them all, but just to
Yeah, I'll try to keep my answer shorter. So the reason I wrote the book is that I really wanted to be able to work with families, and I knew from everything I was reading, from everything I was hearing on the news, I knew that these families were everywhere. And as the opioid crisis started to happen, and you know, they were everywhere. Family members were suffering so much, and there was so little help for them. And I knew I couldn't work with every family. So I thought, I'm just going to put it down in a book, and people can, read my book. And so that's what I did. I never expected the book to win any awards, which it has. I didn't expect that it would be used in rehab centers and places like that for the families, which it is. When you're an addict in active addiction, you never think ever that anything you do is going to be of any benefit or value to the world. So this was all a surprise to me. But that's why I wrote it. So you're asking where I got the 10 tips from. It's a hard thing to answer. They just sort of came to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was thinking about what the families presented to me, what they told me that they were living with, and what they were trying to do for the addicts that wasn't working. And the tips just came to me. So one of the tips that I like very much is, I think it's the third tip. Yeah. And it says, you cannot control or fix another person, so stop trying.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're a loved one of an addict of any kind, you're really wanting that to stop. And you just think that if you keep doing the right thing, if you could just do the right thing, if you can just figure out what that is, and you can just control the addict, that'll change everything. But that's not how it works. And there's a quote that I have from other people. They're not my quotes. For each tip, I have a quote, and I love this one. It's my favorite one. It's from Robert Heinlein, who wrote Stranger in a Strange Land, for anybody who knows that book, because I always felt like a stranger in a strange land. He said, never try to teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and it annoys the pig. So I'm not calling addicts pigs, please understand, because I'm an addict.
Mm-hmm.
But, a couple of other tips that I think are really important is to know the difference between enabling and helping. Enabling keeps an addict stuck in the addiction. Helping gives them a fighting chance of getting out of the addiction. An enabled addict does not usually recover, because why should they? So when we enable, what we're basically doing is we're doing for an addict what they can and should be doing for themselves. And loved ones try to do that a lot. And helping is changing that into behaviors that actually work. Right? And another tip would be that self-care does not equal selfish, and how important it is for the family members of people with addictions to take care of themselves. What they usually do is they put their own needs on the back burner, and they just pour all of their attention, everything, into the addict, and that's not good for the addict. And it's not good for them, and it's usually not good for their relationships. And so the loved ones need to really look at, how do I need to take care of myself physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally? Yeah. So those, I think, are probably the three most important. I think they're all important, but I think those are the three most imperative to look at.
Great, Candace.
So Candace, is it fair to say your approach is leaning towards a systemic approach as opposed to an individual approach?
Not quite sure what you mean by that. Can you?
Systemic meaning you're looking at the whole system, working with the family, the loved ones, as opposed to, like the identified patient, you're just working with the addict and trying to,
Absolutely, you nailed it. Yeah. If we only work with the addict, which is usually what happens in 12-step programs, in treatment programs, rehabs, what happens is the addict may actually make some progress and do some really good work on themselves and have some epiphanies and aha moments, and then they go back into the same dysfunctional system they came from in their families, because nobody's working with the families, and the families don't know what to change until we work with them. That's why it's so important to work with them.
So do you work with this? Sorry, Candace, go ahead, finish.
No, please, Juliet.
Well, I was just going to ask, maybe you were going to answer this, but do you work with the addict, as you say, and the same family member, or do you suggest that family members work with somebody different? How do you do family sessions? How do you work?
Yeah. I usually start working with the person who reaches out for help, because that's the person that's courageous enough to stand up in a family who maybe has never really talked about this to anybody, or they've talked to a lot of people and haven't gotten the help they needed, but they stand up and they say, we need help. I need my family to get some help. And so I start working with them. And it's usually a family member. It's usually a spouse or parent. Sometimes it's a sibling, and as that person starts to understand what they've been doing and they start to make some changes, the other people in the family kind of sit up and take notice, including the addict. When the addicts see the family members making some changes and not enabling them, or certainly not as much, they usually say to themselves, like, uh-oh, like, this isn't working for me anymore. I think maybe I better do something different. And so the whole family starts to heal. Addicts will not, I've never heard of one, maybe there's one out there, but I've never heard of one who goes up to the family and says, please set some healthy boundaries for me. Like, that just doesn't happen. And they also don't go to their family members and say, thank you so much for setting healthy boundaries for me. Like, it's a thankless job for a while until the addict realizes that this is good for them, for their own lives. But yeah, and that's why with my book, if you're going to be recommending my book to people, don't recommend it to an addict, because the addicts don't like my book, because I'm talking about boundaries and consequences. And I wrote the book specifically for the loved ones. There's a lot of books for addicts out there. Yeah.
So Candace, is there a difference between your approach of working with alcohol and drug addiction when compared to, say, gambling addiction, internet addiction, other forms of addiction?
Yes and no. And I do want to just add from the last question that yes, we do work with the addicts as well when they're ready. What we do is we help the families get the addict ready for help. That's what we do. In a nutshell, that's what we do. So the yes and no answer to your question, Clinton, is that when somebody is addicted to a mind-altering substance, something that really scrambles the brain, things like alcohol and drugs, really, those are the two, then what has to happen before you can work with that person is they need to be stabilized physically. They may not be stabilized emotionally quite yet, but they need to be able to, because if you work with somebody who's addicted to those things and they get triggered in a session, which happens, I mean, we talk about things that are difficult. What we want to try to avoid is for that person to go running to the drugs or the alcohol to cope with that trigger. We want to be able to give them some other coping mechanisms and to help them stabilize before we do any deep work with them. I see addiction as, you know, addiction is addiction is addiction. It isn't really about the addiction. There are mind-altering addictions. There are mood-altering addictions, which are also called process addictions, that don't scramble the brain, but really change the mood. So those would be cigarettes, gambling, eating disorders, watching porn, you know, those kinds of addictions. It doesn't really matter what addiction a person chooses. And I think we all have at least one addiction that we maybe don't admit. I'll admit mine. I've got 30 years clean and sober from alcohol and drugs, but I love chocolate. So I have to be careful about chocolate. And I think we all have something that we go to. But really what matters is what's underneath the need to use addiction. So I don't ask people, how much did you drink last week? You know, I don't care about that. I mean, I care, but I don't care. That's not what's important. It's if you drank last week, what was that like for you? How did that feel for you? How did you feel about yourself when you did that? What was going on for you when you had the glass in your hand before you took a sip, right? So those are the things that we talk about. What's underneath? What's the pain? What's the trauma underneath the need for having to use the addiction? And I will also say that I'm not the kind of therapist who goes back into the past just to kind of dig around in the past. But if there's something that's from the past that's affecting their present, then we need to deal with that so that we can have a better present and have a better future.
Great. So what are some of the key struggles that family members have? I'm thinking of it like, what is their pain and what is their main struggle that they bring to you when they're coming? Why do they come to you?
Yeah, that's a real interesting question. When people come to me, by the time they get to me, they've usually gone to other people that they've worked with and they haven't gotten what they needed, because there are many people, many therapists out there who don't really know how to work with families, but it's really not that hard. So, and we need more of you. So if anybody is interested in learning how to work with the families of addicts, please contact me. I'd love to talk with you. They come in and they say two things. One is we're at the end of our rope, and the other is we know we're enabling, but. And the but is we just don't know what else to do. We have one family that's just about to start working with us who told us that they are probably the best enablers of any people on the planet, which probably isn't true, but that's how they see themselves. And they know they're doing it and they don't know how to stop doing it. They don't know what else to do. So those would probably be, you know, I just want to give up. I just want to go to Mexico and stay there, and or somewhere in the world and not have to deal with this. And we really don't know what to do because nobody's taught them. It's not that people can't learn. Addiction doesn't happen in bad families. You know, it addresses all families. We either all have an addict in our families or we know somebody who does. It's gotten that prevalent. And the sticking point, I think, is that they remember their loved ones before they became addicted. They remember their children before they had all kinds of mood shifts and bad behavior, you know, or their husband before he was drinking so much, or, and they just want that person back. And they try everything they can and they don't know how to get that person back. And one of the things that they do is they try to be loving. They try to be giving and loving and compassionate. And so somebody says, Mom, I need $20. And mom knows exactly where that $20 is going to go. It's going to go into their arm, or it's going to go down their throat, or it's going to go to the casino, or it's going to go somewhere. But mom thinks that she's doing something loving by giving the addict the 20 bucks. That's not a loving act. So family members have to learn about setting appropriate, healthy, self-respecting boundaries that have consequences that mean something to the addict.
Well, Candice, I wonder on this point, it might be helpful just to clarify, because you have mentioned it already. What would be an example of an enabling behavior versus a helping behavior that a loved one could do or is doing?
Yeah. Okay, so sometimes what happens, frequently actually, if you've got an adult child who's an addict, we've got a lot of 30-year-old adult children in our practice that at Love with Boundaries that are addicted, and they still live in the family home, often rent-free. They don't have to contribute anything. They get to live there. They get to have their cushy bed and their hot shower and food in the fridge. And sometimes people are even cooking for them and doing their laundry and shopping for the food. And, you know, every need is taken care of for them without them having to lift a finger to even bring their dishes to the dishwasher. And sometimes these people, you know, they get really, when an addict gets angry, when an addict hears the word no, like that's the word that addicts hate to hear the most. And so when an addict hears that word, sometimes what they do is they punch a hole in the wall. Or if somebody's physically in their way, they shove them out of the way, and they're verbally abusive. They do those kinds of things. And because there are no boundaries in the home, they're allowed to get away with what I call bad behavior. So what loved ones need to do is be able to say to the addicts, you know, we love you. We love you. We've always loved you, and we love you so much. We don't always like your behavior, but we love you. And we love you enough to start saying no to you. We love you so much that we are no longer willing to support you in addiction. We don't want to see you be in addiction, and we're not willing to support you to stay in it. We are willing to support you in recovery. So when you're ready to do that, let us know. And if you're going to stay in the family home, you need to start paying rent. You need to start buying and maybe cooking some of your own food. You need to, you know, do something in the home. You need to contribute to the family home, and you need to stop being abusive. And we're saying this to you not as a punishment, but because we love you so much and we want to prepare you for the world that's actually out there. So that's the difference.
I'm just thinking I was thinking of this, and somebody just put in the chat that loved ones often feel guilty when they don't enable. And I was wondering, so like that is true, that making that shift from enabling to helping can create guilt, or people feel like they're being selfish, like you pointed out before. So how do you help them make that shift if that's what they're feeling? Because I think that's probably the hardest thing that you need to get, you know, that is part of the healing process for them, is to make that shift.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that comment. Thank you to whoever made it. What we point out to the families that work with us is that this work is not a sprint. This is a marathon. This takes time. We usually work with families anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and sometimes longer. Every once in a while, a family has what they need before 3 months and they go off and they're fine. But most of the time it's about 3 to 6 months. And they learn what to do and how to do it. And they also have an opportunity to talk about how they feel about this guilt that they feel, the shame that they feel. They feel often totally responsible for the fact that they have an addict in their lives. And they're so afraid of being judged by other people for this that often they don't talk about it at all. I don't believe that, and I touched on this a little earlier, I don't believe that, and I'm going to be a little provocative here. I've learned how to be provocative. I don't believe that addiction is a disease. And I know that sometimes people get really upset when I say that. I have a disease. I have a medical disease. I can't say, gee, I think I just won't have Crohn's anymore. You know, I don't like it, don't want it, not going to have it anymore. Crohn's is a what they call an incurable disease. I'm a lot better because I take better care of myself, but I can't just get rid of Crohn's. I've had it about 50 years now. But I can do that with addiction. And I've proven that I can do that with addiction. I'm living proof of what I talk about. Addiction, being in active addiction, is a choice that people make. I don't believe that anybody makes the choice to become an addict. I didn't. I think most people who become addicted think that that will never happen to them. It won't happen to me. I won't get addicted. It'll happen to the other guy, but I can use heroin as much as I want and I'll be fine. I can quit whenever I want to, you know. But staying in active addiction when we know for sure that our lives are a mess, that's a choice. And every addict out there knows that, because there's lots of places to get help. And every addict that's in recovery knows that too. Whether they go by the disease model or they don't, underneath it, it's a choice to stay in it or go into some kind of active recovery. So, you know, this is what we teach families. We don't teach families that your addict has a disease and he or she is powerless over it. I mean, what a disempowering message to give someone. And when people with an addiction, when somebody is told you have a disease and you'll always have this, what they do is they respond in one of two ways. They either get really passive and they say, well, I have a disease, I can't help it. Or they get really aggressive and they say, I have a disease, get out of my face, F off, don't bother me. How is any of that helpful? But to help an addict see, to help a family first see that this is a choice that their addicts are making, takes away a lot of the guilt, because we can't make anybody else's choices for them. And what the families need to do is look at their own, what I like to call codependency. It's a buzzword, but you know, people pleasing. A lot of family members, when they have addiction in the family, they don't want to get an addict upset because oh my God, they hate conflict. They hate conflict so much that if he punches a hole in the wall, I'll just spackle over it. That's not helpful. Okay, so what happened for you? Why is it that conflict is so difficult for you? Let's heal that. Let's teach you how to deal with conflict, with somebody's anger toward you, somebody's disappointment or frustration toward you. Let's help you learn how to deal with that so you can be emotionally free to do the right things for your addict and love your addict enough to do what's right for them, even when it's not always comfortable for you.
That's an interesting point, Candice, and particularly about people pleasing. I'm wondering, are there unique struggles that, say, a spouse versus a parent versus other family members like a sibling would have, or do they tend to generalize across all the different loved ones?
Well, I'll give you an example of a family that I'm working with right now. I have been working mostly with the parents of a 30-something-year-old son who's been getting away with not doing anything with his life because his parents didn't know what to do, even after a lot of counseling and support groups, and they just weren't where they are now. And now, by the way, the son got himself into detox and is waiting for a treatment bed. He's actually in the treatment center waiting for a bed. Yay. So the mother, she doesn't feel very guilty at all. She's really pissed off with all of this, and she just wants this to end. So that's her kind of personality. The father is still really people pleasing, really was anyway, enabling the son and going and picking him up and driving him places and buying him food, even though he's on disability and he gets money from the government. And, you know, he's finally understanding that he needs to stop that. And so he has basically stopped that. And guess what happened? The son went to detox. The son's waiting for a treatment bed. But he has a sister who's about 3 or 4 years younger. She's doing great in her life, very successful, very high functioning, and guilt-ridden about all of this, that she has such a good life and her brother doesn't. And so she enables her brother, or has been. I'm actually seeing her for the second time today. She is learning about her own guilt, and that she really needs to find ways to let go of that, to understand it and let go of it, because it isn't helping her brother at all. And it isn't helping her. Mm-hmm. So it depends. It isn't always the parents that feel guilty. Sometimes it is the siblings. It's kind of like survivor guilt. I've got such a great life and he's miserable. That's a hard one for siblings. Mm-hmm.
And do you notice a difference with the spouses then, in terms of their enabling behaviors?
The spouses, often, in my experience, the spouses know that the partner, I'll just use pronouns here because it's just make it easier. You know, like the wife knows that the husband has been drinking for a long time, but she didn't want to see it. So she didn't see it. And she married him and she didn't know that he had an alcohol problem. She didn't know until she had to know, because addiction is progressive. If there isn't help for it, it just gets worse and worse, because there's tolerance involved and we need more and more of the same thing to get the effect we want. So she finally clues in that, you know, they have no money, he's abusive to his children and to her, and all of that is happening. And especially when there are children involved, the woman feels very guilty. That's definitely something that we see a lot. But it depends on what people grew up with, because if the wife, for example, is the daughter of somebody who had an addiction, and she was programmed to be the person that made everything smooth, that made everything okay, that took care of everything, and this happens a lot, especially with women, female children, she's going to find herself somebody to do that with, even if she doesn't mean to, until she heals that dynamic within herself. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
We're going to move to Q&A in just a couple of minutes here, Candice, because we've got some good questions coming through from the attendees. But my final question to you is how can therapists best help family members who are struggling with the addiction of a loved one? Are there key things that they need to do in the therapy?
Well, the first thing that they need to do is, if things aren't getting any better for them, and they probably won't be until they get help, they need to reach out for help. They need to find really good help from people who know what to do for them, know how to guide them. And again, there aren't that many of us who are working in this field, whose niche it is, who are specifically working with families. Unfortunately, we need so many more, because there's so many families out there. So they do need to they need to not give up, you know, and they need to keep trying to find the help that they need. They can definitely contact Love with Boundaries. We give a free 30-minute consultation where we learn a little bit more about you and what's going on for you. We tell you how we work. We see if you're a fit for us, if we're a fit for you. And all you have to do is fill out a questionnaire. I think you've got the link for that now. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire. It's also on the website. As soon as we get your questionnaire, we'll get in touch with you and offer you that free consultation. So that's something that you can do.
This would be for people in Canada?
Oh no, you know, one of the good things about COVID is Zoom. And because of Zoom, we're able to work all over the world. We have people in so many different countries. We've got people in Japan. We've got people in Australia, where you are. We've got people in the States. And as long as you speak English, because we don't have counselors that speak another language yet, unfortunately. But we work with people all over the world. So.
And that questionnaire is for, just to be clear, that's for family members, right? Not for therapists, for family members.
It's for family members. Yeah. If you know, as a therapist listening today, if you're interested in doing this work, then just email me. And I don't know if my email address is with you, but my email address is Candace, and it's CANDACE. ACE, not ICE, is what I like to tell people. Not ICE. So it's Candace@lovewithboundaries.com.
We'll be giving up the link to your website, and you have a contact link on there too, so that they'll find you that way.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And also sometimes we hear from the addicts as well. Every once in a while, we get an addict who fills out a questionnaire saying, "I'm done. I don't know what to do, but I'm done." And it's like, yay. Yeah.
Let's move to the questions, the Q&A questions. Margie is asking, how do you help families, couples where the addict doesn't recognize they are the addict? I think you kind of did answer that, because you're saying that the family member's coming in first. So you're working with the family member, right?
That's right. We teach the families how to get the addict ready for help, to stop enabling, to stop making it so comfortable and cushy for the addict, and for them to finally wake up and say, okay, I'm not enjoying this anymore. This is not fun for me anymore.
I would think it's important to keep expectations in check, because not all addicts, even when they do set really clear boundaries and stop enabling them, they don't, I mean, not all addicts will choose to get help.
This is true. Not all addicts will. Most will, not all addicts will. But either way, whether the addict decides to clean up, stop drinking, stop watching porn, whatever, the loved ones get their lives back. And that's what's really important. And usually when the addicts see that, that's when they go, oh dear, this really isn't working anymore the way I want it to.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting question here. Someone said they really enjoyed your example of the young adult living at home and how you might ask them to take responsibility. But how would you translate that to, say, a parent shifting from an enabling behavior to a helping behavior? A parent who's an addict.
The parent that's an addict? Yeah, we do get that sometimes. It's basically the same thing. But the incentive is different, because the child does usually, maybe they do, but usually they don't have money to hold over the addict as a consequence. They're not going to say to their parent, I'm not going to give you any more money if you keep using. Like, that doesn't happen in those relationships. But what they can say to their parents is, you know, it just pains me to see you doing this, choosing this for your life. It's tearing me apart. And I don't want to be part of this anymore. So if you're going to choose to drink or use or gamble or whatever, then and not get any help for it, then I like to say, using hesitant language, like, I don't think I'm going to want to spend a whole lot of time with you. Instead of saying, I'm not going to see you anymore. Instead of saying it like that, to say, you know, I don't think I'm going to want to be around you very much.
You don't make it an ultimatum.
No, you don't make an ultimatum. You speak your truth. That's a different thing. Yeah.
Here's a interesting one. My experience is that families, Nancy's saying this, want their loved ones to simply be fixed and return them home in sobriety in a new form. In many cases, the family does not want to change. They see the addiction as outside of them or separate to their functioning as a family.
Yeah. And I kind of say, good luck with that.
Well, then I guess
It
for
is-
you, those people wouldn't be coming to you because they don't see it's their problem.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're not going to be a fit for our program.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
we basically have a 100% success rate for the families who do what we
Mhm.
suggest for them and
Mhm.
follow the program that we're laying out for them, which is not cookie cutter, by the way.
Mhm.
Every family is different. So it's not like, okay, in week number 1, you set this boundary, and in week number 2, you do that. It's not like that. But if they are willing to follow what we're telling them and start to understand the logic behind it and become emotionally invested, the families heal, even when the addicts decide not to.
So when you say success rate, you're measuring success based on that they're able to set boundaries and do all of that. Is that kind of the factors that you're looking at in terms of looking at success?
Yes and no. Along the line, yes, but the ultimate success is feeling so much
Mhm.
better about your life, better about yourself. You have your self-respect, which to me is different from self-esteem. I don't know if you want me to talk about that, but self-respect, just feeling like I'm not kowtowing and catering all the time to my addict. I
Mhm.
have a life that I'm enjoying.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Trish is asking, are there times that are better to set boundaries with an addict than others? And how do you gauge when might be the best time? I guess when they're not under the influence would be important.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because trying to talk to the addiction, trying to talk to alcohol, trying to talk to any kind of drugs, any kind of mind altering stuff going on, or even in the throes of, I'm gambling and I love it and I'm never going to stop, especially if you keep paying my rent when I don't have money. You don't want to talk to an addict when they're in that place. You want to do the best you can to put it out to them in a non-charged moment. You
Great.
know, at 4 o'clock, we'd like to sit down with you. We'd really like it if you could be clean and sober, because we have some things to discuss. If they come and they're not clean and sober, you try again another time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Somebody's asking about how you work with families separately or together. And I think you basically answered that. Obviously, you do work with them separately. Do you also see family groups or together as well at the same time sometimes?
Yeah, our program is really unique. I've developed this program in a really unique way. We work with everybody in the circle of love of the addict. Anybody who's willing to work with us, including the addict eventually. But we work with anybody in the family. Aunt Susie, who lives way over there, if she's affected, we will work with her, right? Anybody who wants to. And we also keep confidentiality, except with the usual restrictions for confidentiality. We, as therapists, know what those are. But you know, unless somebody's telling me that they're suicidal, they might kill themselves, or they might hurt somebody else, or somebody's hurting a child, that kind of thing, I won't tell you what I had, what was talked about in the session with this person. I won't tell that person, and vice versa.
But do you do family sessions with more than
Yes.
one person? You do those
Yes,
too?
is that the question? Yes, we
Yeah.
definitely do. Yeah, we
Okay.
work with couples. We work with couples as a couple. We work with them individually as well, because sometimes they don't want to say stuff in front of their spouse. We work with parents and their other children. Yeah, we've had as many as 7 people in one Zoom room.
Wow.
You know, and we set some boundaries around that. You know, we make sure that people aren't going to override each other, and that there's respect in that room. And you know, yeah, it's not always easy, but it can work really well. We usually just work with 2 or 3 or 4, maybe max people at a time. So we do what's necessary.
Great.
Right.
We've got a few more questions here. We want to stop in 5 minutes so that we can give all the links and everything.
Okay.
So Clinton, you want to ask another one?
Yes, this question is about, do you find much of the guilt experienced by the family of the addict comes from the perception that the addict should be easily able just to stop and make healthy choices?
So can you say that again, please?
Do you find that much of the guilt experienced by the family and the addict comes from the perception that the family has that the addict should be automatically and easily be able to stop their addiction?
And also the family member, it sounds like too, that the family should be able to.
Just like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think the anger comes from that. The anger, the frustration, the disappointment comes from that. I'm not quite sure about the guilt. I think the guilt is about, I caused this somehow. I'm responsible for somebody else's choices in life, which of course isn't ever true, but that's where the guilt comes from. The anger comes from, well, why can't they just stop? You know what? They can, but they won't usually. If they're continued to be enabled, it's like, if you're going to do my laundry for me and cook for me and give me lots of money, I don't know, you can adopt me and let me have that life. Why should an addict do anything different if you're going to do everything for them? So when people want their addicted loved ones to stop, they need to look at what they're doing first. That's kind of the rule of thumb there.
Right.
How do you handle boundaries when an addict has attachments to their little children? I guess so, setting boundaries, I guess, with young children. I guess that's what the question is.
When the addict has attachment to the children, like
I'm assuming what that means is that boundaries with the addict with the child when they're using, I would assume.
Yeah, we need to be really, really careful about that. And sometimes, I was going to say the ministry, that's in Canada, officials need to be, social workers, whatever, need to be called in so that, because children need us to take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to step in and take care of them. I worked with a family where the husband had loaded guns in his house and threatened his children with loaded guns. And we called the ministry right away.
Of course.
So yeah, those would definitely be restrictions. And, if somebody with an addiction and that kind of behavior is allowed to get away with it, it's like being a bully. Bullies bully because they're allowed to. That's the only reason. They're enabled to bully. And we need to stop that kind of behavior. And we need to stop addicts from doing things that aren't okay, especially with children.
Right. Thank you, Candace. So many great questions. I'm sorry to those who we didn't get to your question today. There were so many, and this has been an amazing presentation. Lots of people are asking for your resources, so let's do that now. Candace does have a page on her website where many of her resources are available, and Juliet has just shared that in the chat. That's on the lovewithboundaries.com website. And of course, you can also download a free chapter of Candace's book. So we've also put the link there in the chat. That's lovewithboundaries.com/free gift. And if anyone wants to contact you directly, Candace, should they just go to the contact form on your website?
Yeah. My email is on there, but it's Candace@lovewithboundaries.com.
And all of these links, by the way, are, because we're live streaming this video into the Facebook group, you're welcome to watch the replay at any time. And below it in the comments, we always put these links there. So if you miss them, you can go there.
Okay.
And get them.
And if I could just say too, I have a TEDx talk that's online. So if you're interested in watching that, you can look up my name and TEDx, and there I'll be.
Great. Candace@lovewithboundaries.com, correct?
Correct.
I put that in the chat too.
Good, thank you.
Well, that's
Fantastic.
great. Thank you so much, Candace, for this. It was
Oh,
great.
it's
And
fun.
I hope that people got a lot out of it, because it is there's a lot of discussion in books, as you say, for people who are addicted, but not as much for the families. And
That's right.
yeah, and they need help for sure. So
Yep.
thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you, Candace. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month. Bye.